And first, I'd like to say you guys are doing a great job of dismantling systems of oppression. And there's no greater source of systematic oppression than the nuclear family. The nuclear family is associated with whiteness. And whiteness is associated with racism, bigotry, transphobia, and white supremacy.
Is the family becoming extinct?
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up. Because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
Greetings, everybody. It's Armor of Truth Live, number 305. G.K. Chesterton said that the love and exaltation of the individual is what keeps insane asylums fully stocked. In 1848, Richard Weaver popularized the timeless assertion that ideas have consequences in his seminal work of the same name. In it, he critiqued modernity and defended traditional values in response to the moral and cultural relativism he saw eroding Western civilization's ethical and social fabric. In the aftermath of World War II, Western societies were beset with a sense of existential uncertainty, asking themselves, how do we reconcile all of this evil we've just witnessed? So much on such a large scale. However, rapid technological advancement numbed that pesky conscience, and the West, specifically the United States, experienced a general shift towards secularism and materialism. The decline of societal values and ethics can be traced back to the abandonment of absolute moral truths and the adoption of nominalism. That is the belief that universals or abstract concepts like faith in God have no actual existence beyond the individual's mental perception of them. For Weaver, the idea that ideas have consequences underscores the belief that a society's philosophical presuppositions or positions, that this profoundly affects its structure, its ethics, and its way of life. So by rejecting universal truths that underpin morality and then embracing relativism, in other words, where it used to be a matter of challenging someone's position, with an antithesis, and pushing philosophy down the line through a rational pursuit of trying. This man has one philosopher would come up with to try to come up with a whole system, a unified system of knowledge, something that unifies the abstract and the concrete, that has an answer for all of life. And eventually, when all of the rational positions are exhausted, then it moves into a position or a state where now it's about synthesis. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Synthesis becomes the truth. So this is why we must have a conversation. This is why we have to talk it out in the public square, because that's where truth is determined. and that's relativism. Society, according to Weaver, sets itself on a path toward moral and social decay when we end up in this position. Everyone talks about restoring our cultural health and stability, but few in the public square today can identify the root cause of the ailment, a fact which is necessary for any such healing to take place. What is truly at stake are the hearts, minds, and souls of an entire generation that has no reference point for a time when Christian values were held dear. Even though we had our shortcomings, folks living in the old America weren't considered oppressive rubes for their faith in Christ. School children were not subjected to porn by their teachers and drag queens that now have an all-access pass to the most vulnerable members of our society. In those days, the Christian church was largely loved, or at least respected, as the ground and foundation of the nation's morals. The spirit of the age is a confusion of humanism, mysticism, and moralism that boastfully looks back on other generations as though we're somehow morally superior now for all of our technology, linguistic mastery, our social progress, and of course our secularization. The truth is that our age is more unspeakably wicked than any other before us, including the age of the transatlantic slave trade. You might think that's a bold statement, but think about it. In America alone, we enslave and murder to an astronomically higher degree than any age before ours. Yet our deeds are all done in the name of progress, peace, and safety. Just as a quick symbol of the decline of our culture, before we're going to talk about what is the root cause of our societal collapse, we'll tell you exactly what it is. Before we do, let's look at another symptom. Here's a symbol of the decline of our culture into an abyss of irrational rationalization. You can do that. You can rationalize something so far. You can rationalize just about anything or justify, and also the exalting of personal autonomy and inner desires as truth. And as a symbol of this now, we have in the United States an array of days throughout the year. Let's see. There it is. Let's go. There you go. This array of days throughout the year that eclipse the calendar so that it now looks like a Mad Chimp's bingo card. These are officially recognized days, widely observed days, days for celebration, days to honor, days to remember certain historical events, and days to draw awareness and support. What these days all have in common is that they are all focused on the LGBTQ plus community. Everything from community events and educational programs to social media campaigns and official federal proclamations. Take note, there are more. There are more than these at the state level. These are just some of the nationally observed special days. And while they're too small really to read, you get the idea, right? You've got one here that I'm afraid you're going to have to look it up to see what it is. It's called the Aromatic Spectrum Awareness Week. Right? March 31st, International Transgender Day of Visibility. We just saw that. April 6th, International Asexuality Day. We've got the International Day of Pink, opposing homophobia. April 14th, the Day of Silence. This is a student-led day of action to take a vow of silence, right, in honor or to highlight this silencing and erasure of LGBTQ plus students. April 26th, there's your Lesbian Visibility Day. May 19th is the Agender Pride Day, because June's not enough. May 22nd, Harvey Milk Day. That's to honor the life and legacy of the first openly gay elected officials in the U.S., Harvey Milk being one of the first. Pansexual Awareness Day, May 25th. The entire month of June is Pride Month. and supposedly marking the anniversary of the Stonewall riots on June 28th, 1969, which is considered to be a pivotal event in the fight for LGBTQ plus rights, which I'm sure on that day when that happened, they had no concept of LGBTQ plus rights or anything trans, or that was. So there's a lot of appropriation of events to make them part of this particular movement. June 27th is HIV testing day. There's one for you. International LGBTQ plus day, June 28th. Lots of days in June, of course. International Drag Day is July 16th. For the bisexuals, Bisexual Awareness Week is September 16th through 23rd. The entire month of October is LGBT History Month. October 8th, another Lesbian Day. There you go, International Lesbian Day. October 11th is also National Coming Out Day. Right. October 17th through 24th is Gender Fluid Visibility Week. You got International Pronoun Day. The third Thursday every October is Spirit Day. That's the day where you wear purple in support of LGBTQ youth to stand against bullying, because purple will do that. Asexual Awareness Week is in October. Intersex Awareness Day. Entire month of November is Trans Awareness Month. November 5th, Transparent Day. Transparent Day, that's the day when you disappear. You become transparent. No, I'm sorry. That's the day for parents who have trans children, I guess. Intersex Day of Remembrance is November 8th. And there you've got Transgender Awareness Week, slap in the middle of Transgender Awareness Month. November 20th, Transgender Day of Remembrance. So that's the Memorial Day for those who've come before. December 1st, World AIDS Day, and December 10th, Human Rights Day. So there you go. There's a couple examples. And so, Summer, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here.
Yes,
hello, everyone.
Good to be. Anyway, why don't you introduce us to I'll go ahead and pull up the article, the main article, the Good Riddance article that we'll be looking at today, and just go ahead and set us up, because I've got a couple more clips to play too.
Well, in short, they are demonizing the nuclear family in multiple hit pieces right now in places like the Business Insider and, of course, our classic The Atlantic magazine, The Atlantic Online, likening the nuclear family to, quote, a microcosm of capitalism, and the idea that the nuclear family's guise of self-sufficiency only barely conceals its toxic codependence with market economy. The narrative about family goes a little like this, that the reign of the nuclear family has come to an end, but that, quote, we can replace it with something even better. But the nuclear family has steadily eroded over the last 50 years. No one can deny. Today, social engineering articles that are written by academics and talking heads, which push these themes, say that the nuclear family is a fringe lifestyle choice now.
Oh yeah, it's the odd one, right?
Yeah, it's not the bedrock of American society anymore. So we're going to be going through this, and also how these articles have their solution embedded, and I think you guys are really savvy. You're going to pick up on where exactly they want to lead people to. But at the end of the day, they're talking about the virtues of universal basic income and this idea of not being able to earn a ton of money, you know? So they're definitely gearing us up into this neo-feudalism state without borders, step by step.
Yeah, okay. Well, so she's broken down the article for you. Let's look at, before we dive into the article, let's go ahead and let's get some definitions, because it's very interesting when you look at definitions of family in 1828 versus today. It's kind of interesting. Here at Noah Webster's 1828. You want to find a good dictionary, a good place online to go and find traditional definitions of words and terms. Webster's 1828 is a good place to go to get that. So a family is the collective body of persons who live in one house and under one head or manager. A household, including parents, children, and in this case, servants, as the case may be, lodgers or boarders. Family is those who descend from one common progenitor, a tribe or a race, a kindred, a lineage. Thus, the Israelites were a branch of the family of Abraham. And the descendants of Reuben, of Manasseh, etc., were called their families. So the whole human race are the family of Adam, the human family. So there's the idea, a collective body of persons who live in one house and under one head or manager. So all of humanity is under one head, and that would be Adam. Modern definitions of family. Here's one from the magazine, a Canadian magazine called The Conversation. They say, for some, family means married parents with children or married heterosexual parents with children. For others, it may mean a chosen family or a cohabiting couple with no children. They say, our working definition of a family consists of any combination of two or more people bound together over time by ties of mutual consent and or birth, adoption or placement, and to take responsibility for various activities of daily living, including love. This includes extended families and extends to non-traditional family forms, including LGBTQ2S plus families. Families in Canada are diverse, and our programs and policies should be responsive to this diversity. However, a narrow definition of family is harmful because it neglects some people. Okay. We have two articles. We're definitely going to get to this first one here, the Good Riddance article. And we've also got one dealing with, written by a female Jewish rabbi. And here's the title of it, Nuclear Families Aren't the Traditional Ones. The Bible is full of blended and chosen families. So we're going to get a great example in where you take a text that is descriptive, it's describing things that are happening, and applying that as though it was a prescriptive text, that this is something that's telling you how to live. Because Jesus defined marriage for us. We don't have to wonder. But of course, a Jewish rabbi is not going to acknowledge Jesus' authority at all. So here, farewell and good riddance to the typical American family. The question we want to start out with here is there an objective reality? Is there an objective reality? As we start out in this article, I want you to be thinking about that. In what do we ground our experiences, our desires, and our beliefs about reality, about the family? And then let me give you just a little bit of a look forward into how we're going to be describing this. By the end of the Renaissance, when the age of reason had dawned, figures like Immanuel Kant and Jean-Jacques Rousseau had fully developed the sense of nature, nature above grace. Thus, man as an autonomous being. So by then, these ideas that man is autonomous, that anything supernatural is really not relevant for the public square, that man is an autonomous being, fully developed by the early to mid 1700s. All concepts of grace and divine revelation were out. Rationalism was now entrenched, and the problem was clearly defined. And that was this, that self-expression must be the first principle. That self-expression is truth. So the individual is at the center of the universe. Now here's the problem. Without an eternal transcendent first principles, grace and divine revelation, all that's left is individual expression. The individual is at the center of the universe. The desires of man's heart are foremost and necessarily good. Remember, here's the claim you're going to be hearing, that these notions that the nuclear family is must go, that family has to be defined any way we want, that marriage has to be defined any way we want it. That's necessarily good because that's progress. That's coming out of the autonomous heart of man. Therefore, any limitation, right? If the desires of the human heart are foremost and necessarily good, then anything that puts a limitation on the individual's desire for autonomy is necessarily bad or evil. But here's the problem. There's a call for unity, to be all one, right? But this unity, with no division whatsoever, that actually rules out freedom. Therefore, love, dignity, grace cannot exist in the system that they want you to be living under, the one that they advocate for. What is right. Now, this comes out of the philosophy of the Marquis de Sade, one of the most depraved men that ever lived, right? But that's where it is. What is right. Whatever is happening, well, that is right, whatever it is. All of this thinking emerges from the first and insufficient view of original sin. That first, it began with Thomas Aquinas in the middle of the 13th century. So this comes actually one of the great theologians of the Catholic Church we find here on the leading edge of this idea, right? It's an insufficient view of original sin. In other words, the whole man isn't fallen. Just the spirit, they would say. But the Bible tells us otherwise. The whole man is fallen. The mind, the intellect, the body, spirit, all of it is fallen. Now, philosophy and science in the classical era, through the Enlightenment, sought to construct a unified system of meaning. This is what I was talking about a moment ago. This is what philosophy was all about. They wanted to try to encompass all of thought and all of life in one theory. And so what would happen is another thinker would come along and say, well, that's not it, and bring his new idea. Say, this is it. This is how philosophy worked over the years. This is how it progressed in its effort to explain everything rationally. Eventually, all the rational possibilities were exhausted. Truth as truth was gone. Now, we're talking here about the Enlightenment. We're getting right up to the Enlightenment. In its place, if truth is gone, what has replaced it? So in truth's place is now synthesis. One system of thought is not simply overruled. Now two systems come into conflict and they do war. They rub up against one another. And a synthesis of new thought emerges with elements of both systems in it. This is the flawed foundation of what we see here and what we're about to read, which is today's relativism. In other words, relativism is the rebellion. The rebellion that you're going to be hearing in here is based in this idea of relativism. Truth is gone, and now truth is the synthesis of many ideas that come together. This is why you hear all the time, let's have a conversation. Relativism is the rebellion. Now, here's why we want to cover this. Summer and I have talked about this a lot, and we believe that this is a very important point. Most Christians today know something is wrong, but can't quite articulate what it is. So, how could Christians or anyone in the nation, how could anyone really give a reason? How could anyone answer back to this and say, no, you're wrong about that, without understanding first principles? How could they give a reason for their faith? 1 Peter 3:15. Well, that's what we're here to do, is we're here to help with that. And let's just give credit to Summer for finding these articles and coming up with this idea, because it's very important. It's relevant for right now. And this was her research that put us onto this topic today. So thanks for that.
My pleasure.
So this dominance of relativism, or the loss of love for truth, leads to a culture-wide infection of despair. So that's ultimately, and you listen in this article as we go through it, you can hear the despair. Everyone's in despair today. America 2024 is embattled with great feelings of despair. Despair arises from the abandonment of hope. The abandonment of hope that any system, philosophical or theological, has the answer for knowledge and all of life. So there is a despair that, a nihilistic despair. What's the purpose? What's the point of this life? So modern Americans live in despair today because we have rejected and forgotten grace, divine revelation, and truth. The truth that there is a design and a purpose for life. And that's important, because when you lose that truth, you lose meaning. And what we're in today is the battle for meaning. This is a battle for meaning. All right, son, is there any way you want to... You outlined the article pretty well there a moment ago. Is there anything you want to start off with? And I'll try to... and I'll just jump in and comment behind you. I'll just see right off the top, right at the very top of the article, it says, the nuclear family has steadily eroded over the last 50 years. And I see that that and they're presenting that as a good thing. Right at the top of the article, it says, for most of the 20th century, the word family in America evoked a predictable picture of a cookie-cutter cleanliness, the happily married husband and wife, their 2.5 kids, and one improbably well-behaved golden retriever, all under the same roof. Now, that's not a premise. That's a statement of a particular position. You can already tell that, right? This is someone who's about to start. This is someone who's about to tell you that there's a problem with that tradition. It's a cliche, right? It's mixed with cliches, and those are not arguments or premises. Go ahead, Sam. What do you? What's your first point on here?
My first point would be that in the 1970s, we started to see a lot of decline in people going to church. We had a big boost of the second wave feminism. And in the 70s also, that was known as the decade of inflation in the United States, which essentially the Federal Reserve was involved in. And, we know how they pull the strings with how the financial wellness of countries around the world. So basically, women in large part were forced to go into the workforce because they couldn't do the household, right? They couldn't do the household anymore with just one income. So we see all of these things happening. And as well, you've got in 1968, you've got Virginia Slims out there. You've come a long way, baby. Yeah. And, how the cigarette was marketed for women's liberation and all of that. And then, of course, before that as well with Edward Bernays and all of that with cigarettes. So women's liberation shows up in this. And also, but we see how we're being socially engineered into this. We see how there are forces from top down. If you can look back in history, you can connect the dots to see how this has all been, in large part, a big setup, right? So we're being told, you've got the CIA putting rock and roll out front and center, that was really one of their big operations, and that was an operation of rebellion and getting people to do as thou wilt, to want to be rebellious. So you've got that movement going. And you go, okay, 70s, 80s, 90s. You've got the Generation X with the latchkey kids who came home to empty households and didn't have mom and dad around, so they were largely unsupervised. And then Gen X has kids, and so on and so forth. And you can see, of course, that all of these things, top down, would have an impact on how the family could thrive and survive. One of the things, though, that I find so insulting and alarming is how they're truly trying to demonize the nuclear family now. They're acting as if the nuclear family is right there along with, how we should get rid of capitalism. So that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, in this article, they have definitely tied together capitalism and the nuclear family, as though one can't exist without the other, or at least that the nuclear family cannot exist outside of a capitalistic framework. And that was what was so interesting about the female rabbi's article, which if we have time, we'll get to that. Yeah, so Summer's laid out the good points here.
If you want me to recap that one more time about that point, is so it would be that the nuclear family is, quote, a microcosm of capitalism. And the idea that the nuclear family guises itself, I would say it's, and that the idea of the nuclear family's guise of self-sufficiency only barely concealing its toxic codependence to market economy, right? So they're trying to say that this is, nuclear family is also going hand in hand with toxic capitalism.
So the way the culture progressed was, for a long time, throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, it was necessary to have children to take care of the property, farms. Right, these were the economic and cultural conditions, and they say in the article, as the economy industrialized, as Summers pointed out already, more young men and women left their family farms for jobs in factories and offices, usually into the cities.
Yeah, so there became like this market for dating because people were no longer in more remote areas typically, but they were coming into the cities.
Yeah, so that's the point. This is where they start their argument that the nuclear family is founded in capitalism, which it's a little bit anachronistic the way they make their argument here, because which did come first? They say the courtship was brought out of the home and into the marketplace. The first time in human history, dating made it necessary to buy things in order to get face time with a prospective partner. Let's see. Yeah, so during the 20th century, a community-based way of life gave way to individuals focusing on their own wants and needs. Now, that's presented in this article as that's progress. Mm-hmm. Moving away from a community-based way of life where people now individuals are focusing on their own wants and needs, and that's a good thing. But you'll notice all the way through the article, what they're really arguing for is this community-based cohesion again. So you'll see the contradiction here. What they want is what already exists. What already exists in the biblical idea of family.
Yeah, can I read an excerpt from the article?
Yeah.
What it says is, what she hopes for is a society whose institutions and policies encourage personal security and trust beyond our families and friends, to make our lives better when we are in and when we are out of intimate relationships, intimate romantic relationships at that. This might include investments in third-party places, such as public libraries and parks where community members can freely gather, or more radical overhauls, such as the provision of universal basic income, which could reduce inequality and boost social cohesion. Rather than changing families to be more like society, this vision of the future imagines a society that's more like a big, supportive family. So this is very much in line with the collective stewardship. This is very much in line with how they want us to be viewing ourselves as a collective. So going away from I to we. It's a constant mantra of themes and catchphrases and jargon and talking points that are flurrying out in the narrative.
Yeah, so this dating culture we just talked about, this is where it says white middle-class families, the men earn the wages that supported the family and their wives raised the children, and ran the home. The nuclear family became, as Summer said, a microcosm of capitalist self-sufficiency and the consumerism that came with it. Now, there's all of these things are true. Consumerism, materialism, definitely happened. They're just seeing it as positive as a positive development, and we're going to tell you the truth about it. But because what in the Christian worldview, every family is a little kingdom of God. It's intended to be that way.
It's God's design.
And it's God's design that there would be a hierarchy and an order. Order, right? That's what we just said. The reason that Christians struggle to defend the faith on topics like this today is because we don't understand what the first principles are. We don't understand why it's necessary. This sense of despair.
Right, and here they're just totally exhorting this idea that we shouldn't be dependent on our friends and our family. That's a dangerous thing. That's bad for us. We don't need to be, because also we can be exploited by our families and friends. We can be abused by our families and friends. Therefore, we need institutions to step in so that we don't have that vulnerability. That's the argument.
They say the nuclear family peaked in between 1950 and 1965 when divorce rates plunged, fertility rates boomed, and the post-war economy flourished. And anyone who broke that mold, anyone who didn't follow, as they say in the article, anyone who didn't get married and take part in this, so if you opted out of marriage, you're often seen as deviant or neurotic. My question is that true? Is it true that you're deviant if you opt out of what keeps the culture alive? And yes, that is deviance. Right, that's the problem here too. Is in relativism, there is no good and evil. There is no deviance in relativism. So they call it the obsession with the nuclear family, masked by its underlying instabilities. And then it goes on to give some weaknesses of the nuclear family. Social inequality. Right, this is what Summer was just talking about, where a recession had made it impossible for many white middle-income husbands to sustain their families on a single salary. And that's what Summer said. When she said there that the more women entered the workforce, this was the move for autonomy, right? I would argue they didn't have to they didn't have to go out of the home, right? You'll see this article here. There's a video right here talking about how, it just so happens there's an article, why childcare became so unaffordable. And
yeah, it's like the Federal Reserve, they're dictating what the market is doing. Here's an inflation period, and people are forced, right? So that's what we're on the precipice of right now. Again, with this universal basic income and this digital system that they want to put us into, they want to take all of our power away from us. So they're just doing that at every single angle. Financially, the taxation is huge, inflation is huge, the dollar, all of it. So people are having to make tough choices. We're really at the same moment that what was happening in the 1970s, I would say, if you look back, just as far as dramatic changes happening and the way that they have it made it fun and cool. They're trying to sell it to women. Be empowered, be liberated, do what you want, make your own money, come do this thing. And then at the end of the day, it's like making women really stressed because they can't spend time with their kids and they can't manage all of it, like cleaning and working and being there with the kids. And so it's creates a really difficult situation, and then there's that tension that comes between male and female, and the whole thing just starts to crash. So from my own, just to bring in my own experience, I was born in 76 and I'm Gen X, and I grew up in a time where I guess I was a latchkey kid with a single mom. And, you know, like a lot of us, we didn't have parents at home. Even the ones who had parents that were married, they didn't have kids like coming home to with parents home, with a mother home. And so we're just kind of like able to do our own thing and sort of left to our own devices. And obviously that's going to be a totally different experience from kids that were born in previous generations. And that's going to set you up for a whole different predisposition. But you can just trace back. It's quite fascinating. If you just look through the past decades, you can see that it's like they're nudging society toward the point in which we're at right now, and how they actually have been coming against the nuclear family. I mean, strategically, from top down, no question.
Yeah, so the rapid disintegration, they talk about the rapid disintegration of the nuclear family, and this really starts in earnest, you can see, in 1969 with the end of no fault, or the beginning of no fault divorce in California. And so this means you can get a divorce. This means that a woman can go to the lawyer and she can get a divorce.
And a man.
And a man. There's a reason I'm saying a woman, though, because you don't have to show infidelity or anything. You just say, I'm not happy, right? And what it says here in the articles is that's what this greater economic autonomy did for women, was it made it easier for women to leave unhappy marriages. Again, there's a presupposition. Presupposition there is leaving an unhappy marriage is necessarily good. It's the right thing to do. That's a presupposition. That is not necessarily true. So that's what you get with no-fault divorce. And the point with that was, to this day, women still overwhelmingly initiate the majority of divorces in America. And so there were, 4 or 5 weaknesses they tried to lay out about the nuclear family. The first one was cost of the work, right? Child care. Well, all the work that's involved in child care, right? It's because the majority of women work outside the home now. I'm going to challenge and say I don't think they ever had to work outside the home. The reason that children are so expensive today, as they say, is really because you're paying for services and institutions on the outside to do the parenting, daycare, private school, or all of these things. Where if according to the traditional setup, all of this stuff is just included at home, right? Even the training. So it's women shoulder the bulk of unpaid caregiving labor for children and aging relatives. Doing more household chores, laundry, cleaning, and cooking are all primarily done by women. And another thing that we see there was paying the person to come in once a week and do the laundry or clean the house became something that not only the super wealthy did, but I knew I had friends, and it was just a very middle class upbringing. I had friends whose parents, and they're not rich people, they were just middle class too, who had someone would come over and clean the house once a week. Mm-hmm. And you're paying that person a good chunk of money to do that for you, or to nanny your children. So the presupposition there, again, is that it's not a good thing for women to have to do all of these household activities to keep the household up, to keep it, to care for the children, to do these things as though that's a bad thing. Now, they're saying in this economy, they shouldn't have to do that. And, well, that's because there's no standard. Whose duties are those? I mean, whose duties, who's the household chores? Who do those duties belong to? Do we just decide on a case by case basis? Yes, in this world we do, and so everyone's confused about what their purpose is.
Yeah, people don't understand what their role is. So again, it's no wonder that society would be in this condition right now.
They say also the amount of work that's required, it's kind of the same thing. Just to keep up a family is just not even really feasible anymore, right? You're going to have to get institutional help with it. And it's true. That's why when I hear someone talking about the demeaning nature of the woman doing household chores and keeping up the home, there is no more sacred of a duty than that. I mean, the home is where we're most comfortable. It's where we receive comfort and food and sleep, and that's where life takes place. There is not a more sacred position in the world than what a
creating
woman
a nice home
does
environment
for a home, right? They say that one of the weaknesses of the nuclear family is that this segmentation of families. That term, segmentation of families. They say it isolates vulnerable individuals and puts them in positions to be abused.
Right.
I'd just have to say, and your version of family doesn't. Your version of family makes for less abuse.
Right. When you can get a kid to say something, and based on what that kid says, then they can come and disappear your kid.
Today, yeah. Christian Godsey, an ethnographer at the University of Pennsylvania, author of Everyday Utopia, subtitle, In Praise of Radical Alternatives to the Traditional Family Home, said the declining birth rate in industrialized countries reflects the economic reality that children are a bad investment for families, and so many people are deciding not to have them. In 2021, a Pew survey of child-free adults under 50, 44% said they're unlikely to ever have children. And when asked why, most responded that they simply don't want to. Nearly 1 in 5, or 20%, said it was due to the cost of children. So part of their argument is refuted by their own data, because it doesn't say here that it's the cost of children that most people cited as their reason for not having children. They said most people said they simply don't want to. And there's a couple different explanations for why people don't want to.
Right, because they've been trained, if they go to university particularly, that we've got a population explosion, which is just completely...
I'm talking more about why would people not want to have families? Because, there's so many opportunities that I can just go out and, I don't want to be burdened. I don't want to be...
right, so
I don't deal ball and chain, right? Or it could be because people have been... It could be because people have been trained or caused to believe that it's a bad thing. Traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
The trauma of... Did you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, well, in my childhood, I had a mother who was very heavily influenced by feminism, I would say, to the largest extent. She was too young to be a hippie, but she was very much into rock and roll and very rebellious. And she had me at a young age. I think she was 20 years old. And so it was a constant stream of wait, don't have kids until you're much older, and kids will ruin
in the years after
kids will ruin your life. She actually said that to me, and that I had ruined her life. And she was constantly stressed out. She was going from person to person and through these relationships, and it was very chaotic. So when I got older, I was just totally traumatized by that. I was just horrified, maybe I would be a bad mom. So because of that, I was too afraid to have children, actually, because of that experience. So for sure, there's definitely, and we're living in this culture that is very much saying all the time how we should be identifying with having been a victim. People going through hard stuff. I mean, that really does exist, right? And through Jesus Christ, I thank God every day that he saved me and healed me from the pain of all of that. But before I found Christ, before Christ saved me, I definitely was impacted by that. And it had to do with the society that I was living in and my mother and how she was influenced by feminism, rock and roll, the culture.
So there's that element of someone just being scared off of
not having kids,
of marriage and well, just
yeah.
And then
I
there's
was a late bloomer.
Then there's the idea of then there's the financial part too. They're talking here about, they made a point in the article that about populations. One of the writers pointed out that while a smaller global population has its perks, the planet certainly isn't complaining. It poses a serious threat to long-term economic growth. He said, shrinking GDPs in the future are a direct result of shrinking populations, and that will challenge the very foundations of American capitalism. So this is, and then he just says, this is one reason why conservatives are so keen to limit women's reproductive freedoms, right? Because it favors capitalism, they say. Right? Is there no concept here of the moral case for being against abortion? Or is it just about wanting to limit women's reproductive freedoms, right? There's no mention here of the moral case at all.
Which is just really ridiculous, because ultimately the ultimate patriarchy, which we've gone over millions of times at this point, anybody who listens to the show regularly about what they're doing with the trans movement, what that's really about, it's about they're going to be guiding reproduction wisely. They're going to be taking over reproduction. They don't want women to even be able to have babies in the future. That is the plan. They want to be able to control reproduction from women, which is the ultimate I would say, like, what a bum deal for these feminists, right? These people that thought that they were finally rising up. And so this article is just completely ignorant and blind to that.
Blind to first principles, no doubt about it. And right here they say later on in the article, over the years, people who departed from the nuclear norm, people who were once considered deviant in society, who departed from the nuclear norm, stopped being seen as aberrations and became examples of the varied paths adulthood could take. I don't guess we would call this really adulthood. We would call this extended adolescence.
Delayed adolescence, yeah.
But they're calling this, right, we just have more options than ever because of progress. And so now people who set out to make their own versions of marriage and family, they're not seen as deviant. They're just seen as, look at more options. Today, nearly a quarter of children in the U.S. live in single-parent households, and a rising share of adults live without a spouse or romantic partner, either alone or with roommates. Where LGBTQ plus partnership was once criminalized across the country, same-sex unions are now sanctioned under federal law as of 2020. Even polyamorous families have gained legal protections in the municipality of Somerville, Massachusetts. So that's all presented as progress. That's a good thing. On the other hand, the article is dripping with despair for our condition. It says here, despite the growing diversity of household types, policies that inform tax systems, housing, healthcare, and social services are designed to provide the greatest benefit to married couples and their children. So we have to, as it said in the article from the Canadian magazine earlier, we need to establish our policies to be more open and to be more open to these new ideas of marriage and family.
Well, can I just mention, you have to think about of course, they want you to recognize all of those dates that you gave earlier, right? On the calendar, we're supposed to recognize all these different major holiday dates for the trans community. The way to break down the institution of marriage and God's design for marriage is to flood the economy, flood with policy and law all these different new definitions of what marriage means, so that at the end of the day, it doesn't even really mean anything to anybody anymore, because there's so many definitions, and you create your reality, and you're the one that gets to decide if you're marrying a furry. You know, it's just, the more options that people have, the less that they're going to recognize something. They're not going to even know how to define it. And that's the whole point. That's the point. That's the point of destroying the old world and bringing in this new world. This is the plan.
So the author of this article is Kelli María Korducki. And one of the things that she says here, gives a little bit of her personal experience. So she is a woman married to a man. So she's in a traditional family. She says, when my partner and I, right, because when you write these articles, you can't say husband anymore because that's gendered language. She says, when my partner and I, she's talking about her husband, file our annual income taxes in the coming weeks, we'll enjoy a sizable tax break thanks to our decision to tie the knot last fall. And as a dependent on his employer-provided health insurance plan, I'm able to make a living as a freelancer without worrying about health care coverage. So see how how the nuclear family and in the state supporting the idea of the nuclear family gave her this opportunity to write this article and to do this work. But then she says, but that narrow policy focus leaves increasing numbers of Americans behind. So what's the solution? Right. So the answer is what? To accommodate those who do not want to honor tradition or natural law. Let's accommodate them and set up a whole new system where you can't do this freelance writing anymore because you're going to have to go out and support yourself now. I can't depend on that husband anymore. It's not going to be possible. Anyway, they go on to talk also about how the lockdowns in 2020 forced a lot of people to realize that the nuclear family was not relevant anymore. I don't see how that's possible, right? They say the hot box of being around the same people all the time, the despair and depression that can go along with this type of social isolation, particularly for mothers of young children. Here's a question, Summer. Do you know who suffered least during the lockdowns? And I have a personal example of this myself. Who were the people that suffered the least during the lockdowns? That was strong, close-knit nuclear families.
Yeah, that was what was in the news all the time. And we saw all those billboards that were everywhere about, call this number if you're being abused by your spouse.
Yeah.
Like that was out on the billboards in addition to the masking billboards. It's like, people are you being abused at home? Are you wearing your mask?
Yeah, people being abused at home is not a function of the nuclear family. That's sin in the heart.
Yeah.
It's a heart problem, not a social problem. All social problems come from the fallen heart. So she says that the pandemic and this, being forced to stay at home with your family, said that this invigorated people's desire for collectivism and community. In the face of urgent necessity, people began to imagine pathways toward a more expansive definition of family. If you say so, but I don't think that's really what people concluded from that experience. But this is their argument. They say a lot of people who lived alone and who used to think of having their own place as the ultimate symbol of personal autonomy and success became very lonely. Yeah. The extended families, here's another point here. The extended families of the past guaranteed a measure of built-in support and community. And that's true. That's a very important point. Built-in support, security, community. That was particularly beneficial for raising children. But the extended family structure also made it far easier for the older generation to control the younger ones, because that's bad.
Right. You don't want
That's
to.
bad.
You don't want to get any wisdom from your elders.
Don't want rules.
Don't want that.
We don't want any kind of authority. No, we're rejecting authority. And it said this situation tended to undermine the romantic couple relationships in the family. All right, and I'd say exactly that's what the family is designed to do, because children ought not to make life-altering decisions. Some of those decisions should be made by the family. So we just have to ask questions like, what is the purpose of a family? What is the purpose of a community? What's the purpose of the state? Should an individual seek first to secure the ability to achieve his personal desires, or should the individual seek that which most benefits his culture? Social cohesion is grounded in personal sacrifice. Collectivism always concludes in more violence and not less. So this is just, I just wrote that at the end of the article because what they're saying that when we get rid of the nuclear family once and for all, there'll be less violence. I'm saying wrong. With your collectivized culture, you're just going to have more violence. It's just going to be a different kind of violence. Right? It won't look like beatings and jackboots. It'll look like psychological conditioning. It'll be just what you've already mentioned earlier, the kind of gaslighting and all of that. Let's look at the article from this rabbi for a minute. Did you look at that one very much? She just makes a case. She just says, it's election season and people are going to be inundated with this idea about culture wars. She says when she grew up, she was very interested, strangely fascinated, she says, with the radio show Focus on the Family. She calls Focus on the Family as a Christian radio show that talks about mostly Christian values. She says it was a precursor to the booming right-wing media landscape that exists today. The booming right-wing media landscape. There's definitely a media presence out there, right-wing, but man, the greater portion of news media is the media landscape is very progressive and liberal. So she says that, listen to this. This is very interesting. The Bible was cited as the source and foundation of a very conservative worldview. As if that's an unusual thing to conclude from the Bible, that conservatism is true, right? Because the Bible is essentially about conserving a very specific set of eternal first principles. She says, I found this infuriating. Right? The fact that people were using the Bible to promote a conservative worldview, she found that infuriating because among the values I heard promoted, she said, were hateful, prejudice-filled judgments about my family. She says because her family, she says they called us dangerous and wrong because my mother loved a woman. These ideas were shared and repeated widely, and now the terms family values and traditional families are linked with this skewed perspective. Right? The term family values is linked with this skewed perspective that a family can only be one thing. Very interesting. But, it was her feelings, right? It was the desires of the heart that are supreme for Susan Goldberg here, Rabbi Susan Goldberg. The desires of her heart are supreme. Judgments, and also you heard there, no one's allowed to make any judgments about absolute truths. To call her family wrong, she said, was hateful, prejudice-filled judgment. Well, is it true? Is the only question we need to ask. Is it true that family structure is bad for our culture? Like if everyone did that, would our culture survive? So according to this rabbi, the biblical standards are infuriating. She goes on to talk about, make some assertions here. She grew up and began studying the Hebrew Bible, the Torah more deeply. The modern concept of the traditional nuclear family was not what I found. Most traditional biblical families do not have two parents, she says. One a man and one a woman. Real biblical families are defined by complex, layered relationships with multiple sets of parents and kids, often connected in ways other than genetics and blood. I challenge you, anybody, can you find me a same-sex marriage other than Roman emperors castrating young boys and taking them on as wives? Can you find anywhere? There's a conflation here of there's a lack of acknowledgement of spiritual families versus fleshly families versus families in the flesh. But she talks about real biblical families. Now, there's a difference here. We're talking about a difference between a descriptive text versus a prescriptive text. And what she's talking about here, she goes on to talk about Moses, Sarah, and Jacob were all non-traditional families that don't look like the nuclear family model, right? That the nuclear family is not what the biblical tradition offers as paradigms for a life of family, community, and meeting. That's her assertion. Now, she makes a claim here. The Torah teaches that families are created for many reasons, including necessity, longing, and love. This remains true today. Now, listen, here's her cases. Summer, listen up to this. You'll know right away what the problem is. Moses was the child of what we would now call an open adoption, which protected him from a murderous decree. He grew up knowing his birth and adopted families, making him the ideal leader when it was time for the great exodus from the tyranny of Pharaoh. Moses. So what happened to Moses was that all of the young males, infants, Pharaoh ordered for them all to be killed, much like Herod would later on. And so that meant that Moses had to be killed. But these women took Moses and hid him. Right? This was the story too, where they put him in the little basket, the ark. It could be kind of like the ark. You could consider it as a type. Anyway, you see the problem with that right off the bat. That they're saying that this example of Moses, this is an example of what we call open adoption. Like he was raised by the village, not right. The problem here is that was not
the normal situation.
Exactly. That's a descriptive.
That was not normative, yeah.
It's a descriptive text. It's not prescribing the way to live your life. Right. The patriarch Jacob, she says, had children with sisters Rachel and Leah, and with their maidservants, Zilpah and Bilhah. These 4 women gave birth to and raised 13 children together. Again, that's a description of what happened, not a prescription for how you're to live your life. She says, just as the book of Genesis is filled with parents longing for children and coming up with active, creative solutions to have a child, is that really active? Yeah, Abraham had sex with his wife's maidservant. Yeah, that's not a prescription for the way you should live. That was Abraham in sin right there. And the results of that would reverberate for centuries. But the point is that's not what you're to do. Today we see families formed through surrogacy, donors known and unknown, and adoption. The problem with surrogacy is well known. When you when you're going to have a surrogate, you have to create multiple embryos. In the case of Dave Rubin and his partner, it was as many as like 18 or 19 embryos that they created. That means that sperm and egg come together and life is created. And what happens to all those that aren't used? Some are frozen, some are destroyed. Yeah, that's not something that we should be celebrating at all. In fact, where we see these same-sex couples go into where we saw the other day, like in Colombia. I think we should probably cover that story about surrogacy sometime.
Yeah, there's all these hubs apparently now where same-sex couples can go and do their surrogacy.
Yeah, and it's a big problem because it's really an abomination. We get down to it, but the rabbi, the female rabbi here says, I empathize with those whose families were considered different, strange, and non-traditional. I empathize with those who felt the judgment, shame, and ostracism that comes with those words. Shame is a good emotion. It's a good thing, right? Shame and guilt are there to keep us out of the ditches. Judgment is a good thing. As a rabbi, she says, I offer a healing to anyone with that pain. Well, she doesn't have any power to offer anybody any healing, but aside from that, we'll move on. She says, we need to celebrate all the families in our communities and to correctly call them all traditional. All right, so what's the problem with that?
Right.
Remember we talked about over there earlier.
God's design.
What about
God's design?
What about the polygamist pedophile?
Yep.
That was your term, right? That was a. What about the polygamist pedophile? Let's say there's a man who finds a.
That's his joy. Are we supposed to be okay with that? Right.
A teenage takes a teenage bride, and whether it's forced or not, if it's under a certain age, it's considered forced. But let's say he takes teenage bride, and then a few years later takes another teenage bride. He's got 3 or 4 teenage brides, and so he's a polygamist and a pedophile. But that's just traditional, right? We should honor all of these, they say. We should honor all the families in our communities and call them all traditional. So that falls apart really fast. The traditional family that I am now in was created from love and in response to a dear one's longing to have a child. My husband was her sperm donor. The 3 adults and 4 kids in our Torah family are connected in many intertwined ways. So in this case, family is defined as a pragmatic arrangement, subject to my needs and my desires, what I define as good and true and beautiful, not what is good and true and beautiful. It says people describe families now in many ways because we don't always have the words to describe our reality. Isn't this interesting? But words create worlds.
Yeah, that just really, you can just hear how it is. It's like they're trying to just put this magical spell out there with this.
I think it's real easy to respond to that too. It says we don't always have the words to describe our reality. That's something we're trying to help
because
anybody.
Of moral relativism.
Yeah. Anybody who watches this show, this is something that we want to. That's what we exist to do, is to give you the words to describe and talk about your reality. As we said,
words create worlds.
Yeah. Modern Americans live in despair, having rejected and forgotten grace, revelation, and the truth that there is a design and purpose for life. So I said, we definitely have the words to define our reality or to describe it. We have words to describe and define marriage. We have words to describe, to define family. We have words to define sin. We have words to define redemption. And Jesus defined marriage and family very plainly.
And you can't miss the sentence that comes after, but words create worlds.
Yeah.
The term traditional family should be reclaimed for all these families. We are not modern or non-traditional, but rather a new leaf on an ancient family tree.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
So this is a strange, inconsistent definition of family that we see, right? In other words, there is no definition of family. In fact, what they're doing is it's just like with marriage, as you just stated very well earlier, that what's been done with the Respect for Marriage Act is now marriage has no definition legally.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, there we go. go. Hour and 14.
Yeah, it's like they really wanted to. I also felt that this article serves to, like, if you are a little bit more conservative leaning and you're a little bit more spiritually minded of a person, an article like this, it's just nodding to sort of this oneness theology, this ecumenical interfaith vibe that's constantly out there. So they're just, she says that she's a rabbi, and she's throwing out biblical scripture and, scripture from the Torah and trying to give you this interpretation from somebody that's supposed to be a spiritual leader. But there's a lot of problems, as you can see, with what's been written here. So, they're coming at it from all angles, from different voices, in different flavors and shades, to get this message across as they try to funnel us into this new way of viewing reality, which, God is in control and we'll see how far it goes. But to be saying at the end of the day that we need to get rid of nuclear family and depend on the state to make sure that we are safe and taken care of.
Yeah, I want to play a clip. It's about 18 seconds long here from Twitter. It's actually from TikTok, and after that, I want to talk to you about John Rappaport here put out one early today in his notes on his Substack, Why I Refuse Religion. And we love John Rappaport. He has done a great job.
Yeah, he does great work.
At uncovering and exposing and giving language to a lot of the things we see, so it makes it easier for us to talk about it and refute it, and but this is where we have to be so careful, right? Because you might read what he wrote, someone who's new to the faith or seeking the faith, or someone who's not grounded in their first principles, who's not grounded at all just yet, might read what Rappaport wrote about religion and then think, well, he got all that stuff about AI right. I better reconsider my position about God. Well, let's listen to this, and I'm going to tell you how John Rappaport's position is really no different than this person here. Now, there's bad language, foul language alert here. I wish we didn't have to go through it, but she's going to use language here.
The nuclear family is a total fucking scam. The nuclear family is a total fucking scam. Please allow me to bemoan that we're not supposed to be doing this alone. The nuclear family is a total fucking scam.
So what's the point? The nuclear family is a scam. We're not supposed to be doing this alone. What is the real complaint? There is no real complaint. There's just an anger for the way things are. Right? So there you go. There's a nice response.
It's contempt for all things conservative, all things traditional, all things historical.
Yeah. Abolishing capitalism. Yeah, I would say it goes deeper than that. Abolishing anything that's true, good, and beautiful. That's definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump into this right quick. And so, yeah, there you go. So John Rappaport wrote this article, and I'm going to be critical of him here. I've done this before with John Rappaport, because when he goes off into talking about religion or spirituality, well, that's our domain here. So we're going to respond to it. He says, I refuse religion because it's organized. It's fronted for, covered up, and has committed endless crimes down through history, all the time invoking the excuse of God. If he's there, I can't imagine he's happy about that. By their wretched example, organized religions have proved a corollary. You don't need religion to develop morality. And I'll hold it right there. That's absolutely true. An atheist can behave morally. The problem is that morality isn't grounded in anything other than himself. Just who determines what's moral? How do you know? Well, the Bible tells us, Ecclesiastes 3:11, Romans 1:2, that that God's law is written on everyone's heart. The reason that we know what is good and evil is because it's written on our heart. Because if survival of the fittest was true, morality would play no role in any of this. Now, continuing, John says, I think God is an idea or a reality that every person ought to make his mind up about on his own, not with the help of an organization with much blood on its hands. Fair enough. Once again, what about the polygamist pedophile who says that's what his God has told him to do? Right? What if he claims that in the name of God? Anyway, he says there's another thing, submission. Many religions preach submission to God based on their claims about what God wants. Now that is definitely no characterization of Christianity at all. Anyway, he says apparently God wants submission. He wants this, he wants that, he demands this, and therefore people have to go along and submit and surrender. No, you don't have to. You don't have to submit and surrender. You can continue to live according to your natural desires. The outcome of that is going to be eternal conscious torment. But anyway, he says if they refuse to surrender and champion free will, they're what? Some religionists would say they're trying to be gods. Well, the thing we know about human free will is that it is enslaved to sin. I've said this here before. I know I have free will. I don't want anything to do with it because I know what my free will, I know the logical conclusion of my free will. It's not good. But, of course, the assumption then is that human free will and autonomy is necessarily a good thing. You see how John Rappaport is caught up in Enlightenment principles with no transcendent ultimate first principle. And the problem with that is that man becomes the ultimate authority. He says, let me try to follow the logic here. God endowed humans with tremendous creative ability, with the ability to think and reason, moral strength, but exercising all those capabilities to the highest extent possible, that would somehow mean people are trying to be God or gods. God played that trick? I don't think so. And I agree with him there. That's terrible summary of religion. Anyway, I fully understand there are people who do want to be gods. That's crazy. Part of their act is wanting to exercise predatory power over others, which is insane, and not in any clinical sense that gets them off the hook for committing crimes. They're insane and guilty and accountable. Hear, hear. Well said. He said there's a word religionists tend to twist. Power. Many of them attribute or say they attribute all power to God. That would leave none to individual humans. I don't accept that for a second, John says. I believe every individual can exercise his power without limits as long as he doesn't infringe on the freedom and well-being of others. I can't imagine a God who wouldn't go along with that. Okay, let's think about that for a second. I believe every individual can exercise his power without limits. Do you really want to follow that one out? You really want to say that is the universal standard for mankind? That everyone should be able to exercise his personal power without limits? Because we've seen what that looks like. Anyway, then he qualifies it with the libertarian principle, as long as he doesn't infringe on the freedom and well-being of others. Let me tell you something. Dusty Devers proved it very well. The case is Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy did his killings because he was addicted to pornography that caused him to want to go out and find new women to whatever it was he was into. And part of what it ultimately ended up in was in murder, was the ultimate expression of his fetish. Right? Well, that's how what a person does with his own power and his own free will that's done in private that absolutely spills over into the public. But John Rappaport says, I can't imagine a God who wouldn't go along with every person being able to exercise his power without limits. No, there must be limits and there must be justice. Let's see here. basically, he just ended up with this. I understand individuals who say there's a greater power and a greater love than my own, and I join it. No, that's not Christianity. Nobody wants to be a Christian. Is that controversial? Do you think, Summer? Is that a controversial statement? Nobody in this world wants to be a Christian.
I understand exactly what you're saying, but no, it's not a controversial.
So it is. Romans 3, verses 10 through 18 tell you plainly, which is quoting the Old Testament. Nobody seeks after God. Nobody wants to submit to God. Nobody has that desire in their heart. That's something that God does to people.
Amen.
So
that's true.
Yeah. So he says this is their decision, he says, and having made it, they have come to terms with what it means in their lives every day. So in that sense, he's talking about religion as this arbitrary, subjective principle. But that's not Christianity in any sense. Let's see. I happen to think materialism, one life and you're done forever, is a curse of the modern age. So he doesn't, as John says, he's not a materialist. So he believes in something transcendent. I can't imagine what that is. He says, a preposterous conclusion, materialism, and its root isn't particularly atheism. I disagree with that. Atheism is the root of, anyway, it says it's more along the lines of ordinary rank stupidity, but that's just me. I couldn't disagree with that. He says, one of my eternal values, although I might not call it that, and you can't call it that. There's nothing eternal about your values, but your soul is eternal, and you're going to want to pay attention to the condition of that soul after your body dies. That's going to be very important, something you don't want to be flippant about. But he says, one of my eternal values is freedom, individual freedom, not license. I don't associate authentic freedom with religion. In many cases, they're opposites, because religions carve and shape freedom so it conveniently turns out to be loyalty to the organization, to its leaders, to its rules. No doubt, that certainly happens. But in Christ, you're free from that free will that's enslaved to sin. Right? That's the new man. That's the new creation. You're no longer enslaved. Outside of Christ, that free will is going to constantly lead to depravity. It might not look the same everywhere, but it will. I just to put a cap on this brief piece, I believe the fight and struggle and the war we're in to keep real freedom and to defeat evil men who want to control and enslave us. I just have to ask, if there is no ultimate standard of truth, why are these men who want to control us evil? Why do you call them evil? Because your personal standard says they're evil? Well, your personal standard and $7.50 will get you a cup of coffee down at Starbucks, but it doesn't mean anything other than that. It doesn't carry any weight, your personal position on it. He says these people want to enslave us and make the world into one coordinated, governed dunghill with them at the top. Why shouldn't they? Look, man, if the answer is individual freedom, why don't you extend the same to them? They're not evil. They're just trying to be free. They're trying to, what did you say earlier? Express their power without limits. That's what you say is good, as long as it doesn't infringe on other people. They don't think they're infringing on other people. They think they're raising everything up a certain level. So there's problems here. He says at the bottom, some of the most moral people I know are atheists. Some of the most moral people I know believe in an afterlife, but not God. Some of the most moral people I know believe in God. You could take out the word moral from these sentences and substitute immoral, and the sentences would still be true. All right. How do we respond here to what John has said? John Rappaport, who we love very much. We appreciate his work to no end here. He's done really good stuff. But we care about him. We care about John Rappaport's soul as well. And anybody else out here watching who thinks what he has said about religion is right on, I'm telling you, that was nonsense. There were some good points in there. But what we just told you about what began really in the Renaissance, actually in the 1300s with Aquinas, with an insufficient view of original sin, has worked its way up and then through into the Renaissance and into the Enlightenment. These principles of freedom that are separated from any actual, transcendent, eternal, unchanging standard. And so the idea here is that religion is bad because people are bad. C.S. Lewis, Screwtape Letters. Once again, how the devil does the details. Screwtape advises Wormwood to use those other Christians as tools to weaken the resolve of the patient. So this is terminology here. Screwtape is the master demon and Wormwood is his understudy. And he's teaching him how to corrupt people. And so he says, Screwtape advises his understudy Wormwood to use the Christians against one another. Use the Christians as tools to weaken the resolve of the patient. The purpose being that when the patient is the Christian, when the patient begins to feel superior to others, when the patient begins to find fault in everyone else's faith, when he looks out and finds fault with all the religions in the world, then he will feel that he is more pure than all of them. This is a great crack in the facade that the devil will exploit. I saw John Rappaport a few weeks ago writing about how when you give over, I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but he appealed to the concept of Lucifer as the ultimate in pragmatic depravity, right? Well, and that's true. He says here, the patient is naive to his own shortcomings. The person is naive to his own shortcomings, and he sees those faults in the other people who are religious as signs that I'm obviously more spiritually mature. Because look at them. They're part of these organizations. And I don't believe in organizational when it comes to spirituality. He's convinced that his special knowledge has given him amazing spiritual insights and unusual abilities to discern error in others. Right? Screwtape advises then that it's good to keep the person in that mindset for as long as possible. And, for the last 500 years or so, this is what we're looking at. Laws that punish, for example, think about this. Laws that punish rape, laws that punish murder, all enforce a form of cultural Christianity. That came from something that you're calling a religion. Christianity is not so much a religion as it is a life and worldview. It's a way, it's a life. It's a life. It's a whole life view. But when we punish rape or murder, this is cultural Christianity at work. But it's a kind of Christianity that cannot regenerate any hearts. Right? It can't regenerate the heart of the rapist or the murderer. But that doesn't make them any less necessary. Irreconcilable forces are in a war for the right to define reality. And the Christian church has been marked for elimination by this new state religion in America. Freedom is not something to aspire to in and of itself, because undefined freedom is meaningless. The character and value of the freedom you aspire to will be determined by what you seek freedom from. If it is freedom from God, and if it's freedom from all boundaries, then you'll freely fall into destruction. If it's freedom from tyrants and the ability to order one's life according to God's standards and boundaries, then you have found true and good freedom. Freedom should always be qualified by what you're seeking to be free from. Some cords should not be broken. Note the word liberty has been used, has been confused since the Enlightenment. Right? It's been equivocated on. Its definition has been used in different ways. Originally, liberty meant freedom from one's chains, figuratively and or literally from debt slavery and or bodily slavery. In the ancient world, sovereignty and ultimate authority were, for better or worse, assumed to be external and transcendent, beyond finite mankind, and grounded in, broadly, ultimate first principles of natural law. Freedom was never understood as a license for the individual to express his power in an unlimited fashion. Freedom was never understood as a license for the individual to do whatever he wants, whatever he feels is best. The notion of freedom as the inalienable human right to proclaim personal sovereignty, to explore all the urges of the spirit and desires of the flesh, unimpeded by law or conscience. In other words, to be autonomous in one's own personal version of reality, apart from every other created being. This idea of freedom, detached from moral absolutes, was born during the Renaissance, or what's known as the rebirth of art, culture, and intellect formed by the great Greek and Roman civilizations. And then tensions between an apostate Roman Catholic system and the French people brought this inner urge to the surface in the period known as the Enlightenment, which saw its victorious ascension to power in the French Revolution, 1789. This version of liberty was grounded in the presupposition that the individual must be free to do whatever he chooses, according to his own internal standard. Right? The understanding of freedom espoused during the American Revolution, 1776, was freedom from tyrants and oppression, or freedom from chains. So as you can see, the core difference between the two is the source of freedom and the purpose of human life. In one, freedom is a matter of personal autonomy or freedom without duties. Rights without obligations. That's what we really want. But that doesn't exist. The problem is that freedom does not come without duties. Rights don't come without obligations. Now the other, the American Revolution version of liberty, expressed freedom from oppressive chains with rights and duties grounded in transcendent, eternally unchanging truth. So any so-called natural rights are rights in name only when men seek to live without an authority. Roger Scruton wrote, "When right lacks the power to substantiate it, its allegiance will begin to slip away." This is the argument for the nation state. This is the argument for centralized power and authority as opposed to decentralized power and authority, because that's what everyone wants. Libertarians want decentralized government and authority. All that's going to mean is artificial intelligence is going to be the new centralized authority. We'll talk about that more later when we get back to the Moloch machine. Mm-hmm. So we need to recapture this true form of freedom if we want to improve our society. We've got to get out of this idea that my desires and what I feel should be, that is ultimate truth. We need freedom from that which puts us in bondage. And it's not religion that puts us in bondage, and it's not governments that put us in bondage. What puts us in bondage is our own sinful heart, our own notions about what should and shouldn't be. When we go out and we try to live according to our own inner desires, and we try to, like the trans movement, forcing everyone to acknowledge something that's self-evidently not true. That's bondage. Why is society becoming so secular and materialistic? One atheist we had a quote from said that the reason that society is becoming more secularist and materialistic, he says that this is a good thing, of course, for the atheist, but he says religious bigotry is driving society towards secularism. Religious bigotry, right? It couldn't be anything else. It couldn't be individual bigotry. It couldn't have anything to do with the individual, right? Or the Enlightenment, or those principles. No, it's religious bigotry. When people join a club that justifies demeaning others who are not in their club, they're engaging in bigotry. Now that's like a little child describing, like, I'm not allowed to be in their club, so I don't like their club. When religious people pray for materialist blessings for themselves, they follow a gospel of materialistic prosperity and not the gospel of Jesus. Very true. From the mouth of the atheist, proving that the image of God is right there and that he suppresses it as hard as he can. There are three gatekeepers of reality. We think about it like this. Three universal longings that human beings have: truth, goodness, and beauty. And there are three guides to this: reason, conscience, and imagination. Reason leads us to truth. Conscience leads us to goodness, or helps us to know what is good. And imagination helps us to see and know what is beautiful. How do we fulfill the Great Commission in the face of an idolatrous new world order and a culture that knows nothing other than to fall down and worship at the altar of the individual or at the altar of materialism? Emotions are congruent with our beliefs. Therefore, we must align our beliefs to truth so that our emotions will be aligned with reality. This is kind of like Jonathan Haidt, who's written about this. He's a social psychologist. He's a psychologist of some kind. I apologize for not remembering his title. But he's written that, he's given the example of the elephant and the rider of the elephant. And it's like our reason is like the rider on top of the elephant. And then our emotions are the elephant. And so, yeah, the reason can control that elephant a little bit here and there, but if that elephant decides to go left when reason wants to go right, the emotions, they're going to go left. So in that sense, emotions are really in control of our reason. And that's upside down, right? That's upside down from what Plato was talking about. So what we have to do when we know this, and this is a biblical principle, right? That you that your heart and your desires are wicked. They're out of balance. So we must align our beliefs with truth so that our emotions will be aligned with reality. Nothing is more important than getting the gospel right, though. We're not building a following of viewers and listeners to agree with our opinion. You're not attempting to tell people what they want to hear. We must, and you must, tell everyone the truth, which is what they need to hear, because that is love. That is our command from our Lord. Love one another and serve the world. Make sure I wanted to get Philippians 2. We'll look at Philippians 2 in just a second. All human souls are created for the praise and glory of God. That's the purpose of the human being. And God's word will be our first and last truth. Sorry about that. There. I'll say that again. All human souls, every person is created for the praise and glory of God, and His word is our last and first, our first and last truth. As Jesus is our first and last Savior, King, Master, and hope. So if you disagree with us in any issue, then we challenge you to test everything. Test everything by the Scriptures. Prayerfully ask God for guidance. Hold us accountable according to the Scriptures that we claim are supreme. Hold us accountable according to the Scriptures alone and keep coming back. You'll always find Christ exalted, the Scriptures foundational, and the gospel proclaimed. Now, I speak to you here as a layman commentator, a cultural apologist, and that's what my wife Summer and I, we do here, cultural apologetics and polemics. But there's nothing special about me or us. This is the duty of every Christian. I'm not a free agent. God has blessed us in amazing ways so that we could be here to serve you in this modern medium. And we pray that you would be blessed, challenged, fed, and led to follow through in faith, full faith, to our Lord Jesus Christ for all of your life. So let's finish it up right here. Philippians chapter 2. Now, in response to everything we've just read about the nuclear family and what we read there about the female rabbi, and then as John Rappaport said about religion, it's oppressive and it causes damage to society. I would say, in response, simply this: Philippians chapter 2. So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others, having this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. Being born in the likeness of men and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you both to will and work for his good pleasure. For his good pleasure. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I'm glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. I thought I would share that with you because that's the Christian faith. There you see the gospel. And there is nothing in there that sounds anything remotely like what John Rappaport described as religion. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. How about that? Count others as more significant than yourselves. Now that is a far cry from saying that I believe every person should have the power, should be able to, let me read it again for you. I'll find it here. Everyone should have the power to express, should be able to
express themselves without limit.
To express his power without limitation. Yeah, here it is. One of my eternal values, Rappaport said, is freedom. Individual freedom, not license. I don't associate authentic freedom with religion. In many cases, they're opposites. Agreed, right? What I've just read is not religion. That's a relationship. He says, because religions carve and shape freedom so it conveniently turns out to be loyalty to the organization, to its leaders. And here, this other point about power. I fully understand individuals who say there's a greater power and greater love than my own, but this is their decision, and having made it, they have come to terms with what it means in their daily lives. He says, yeah, here it is. There's a word religionists, he says, tend to twist, and that's power. Many of them attribute or say they attribute all power to God, and that would leave none for the humans. When we talk about the power of God, we're not talking about the power to build a house. We're not talking about the power to build Hoover Dam. We're not talking about the power to clean the bathroom. What we're talking about is the power to create matter and energy out of nothing. We're talking about the power of self-existence. It's known as the aseity of God. It's his self-existent, uncreated, self-existent. That's what we mean when we attribute all power to God. It has nothing to do with what human beings can or can't accomplish of their own will. He says, I believe every individual can exercise his power without limits. And then, of course, as long as he doesn't infringe on the freedom and well-being of others. And I can't imagine a God who wouldn't go along with that. Well, God did create a perfect situation. And it was man's desire for autonomy, to take the shortcut to knowledge, that caused the fall. So the problem isn't God, John Rappaport. The problem is your heart and my heart. And until we can all grasp that, nothing changes. Nothing out there changes. And I would encourage anyone to go, especially John Rappaport, read Philippians 2. Just read Philippians 2. You don't have to read it all. Just read down through verse 18. Philippians 2, 1 through 18, and tell me, does that sound like your description of religion? No doubt, a lot of what you said about religion is true, but that is no argument against what is the truth. Just because people behave badly doesn't mean that there is no truth whatsoever in this. All right, son, anything you got?
I just wanted to say thank you guys for being with us, and thank you, Brad. And wanted to leave you with Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go.
There it is. Excellent. I think we can throw on top of that one. Let's look at, let's go with our old standby there, which is, sounds like a re-quoting of Joshua. The words of Jesus in John 16:33. I'll start at 32. Behold, the hour is coming, indeed it has come, when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone, yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. Verse 33, John 16:33. Lord Jesus says, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. You will have trouble, persecutions. But take heart. I have overcome the world.
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up. Because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.